The Choice Agenda is an AVAC project. It consists of a very robust global listserv, which many of you are a part of, and webinars like this. We do at least a webinar a month. And in April, we are doing 3. We run a playlist for all of our webinars. Here's the playlist for today. And what's coming up? We have a couple of really great webinars besides this one in April. On April 9th, we're talking about surveillance. If my partner in crime here, Rania, can drop in these links, you can go ahead and register right now for Watching the Watcher, which is coming up next week on April 9th. And then a few weeks later, at the end of the month, we're focusing on the United States and how we can't end HIV in the United States without equitable PrEP access, and figuring out how we actually make that happen. We have a lot of work to do in the United States in terms of PrEP access and making it equitable. But today we are here to talk about cisgender women. We have 2 fabulous speakers, Dr. Jeanne Marrazzo and Joyce Nganga from Waukee Health, and a really fantastic moderator, Rania Copeland with Equity and Impact Solutions. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and I am going to invite Rania to come forward and get us started. And again, thank you all so much for being here. Rania, over to you.
Thank you so much, Jim. Thank you so much for the invitation to be able to moderate such an amazing panel on a really, really important topic, PrEP and cisgender women. I've been doing HIV work for all of my adult career in the US, and I think I can probably speak for everyone who decided to take their time and energy to be here today that believes that PrEP, pre-exposure prophylaxis, is one of the key ways that we are going to get to the end of the HIV epidemic, which are goals that we all have set globally. But what we also know when it comes to PrEP, more than a decade after its approval, is that there is still much room for improvement, and that PrEP is not a tool that is being accessed by communities that need them most. And when it comes to cisgender women in particular, there's a huge need that, and we know that part of the need when it comes to cisgender women is choice and options, and that potentially daily pills for PrEP is not the best option for cisgender women, and that we know the more options that we have, the better utilization is. And so I'm super excited to be able to moderate such an important conversation talking about cisgender women. I'm also really excited about the amazing panelists that we have. And so I'm going to introduce Dr. Jeanne Marrazzo. She is a scientific leader in the fields of STI and HIV prevention, microbiology, and the microbiome of the female genital tract. We are so honored to have her now as the director of the National Institutes of Health, National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases, NIAID. NIAID conducts and supports basic and applied research to better understanding, treat, and ultimately prevent infectious, immunogenic, and allergic diseases. As the newest NIAID director, Dr. Marrazzo oversees NIAID's budget of $6.3 billion, which supports research to advance the understanding, diagnosis, and treatment of infectious, immunologic, and allergic diseases. She supports research at universities and research organizations around the US and across NIAID's laboratories. And really what she's doing is supporting research to advance the understanding, diagnosis, and treatment of infectious, immunologic, and allergic diseases. Her research in discovery and implementation science has focused on the human microbiome, specifically as it relates to female reproductive tract infections and hormonal contraception, which we know is so important when we're talking about cisgender women. She focuses on prevention of HIV infection using biomedical interventions, including PrEP and microbicides, and the pathogenesis and management of bacterial vaginosis, sexually transmitted diseases in HIV infected people, and management of antibiotic resistance and gonorrhea. She has been a principal investigator on NIH grants continuously since 1997 and has served frequently as a peer reviewer and advisory committee member. She has served as a mentor to trainees at all stages of professional development, including on NIH-funded training grants, and was the recipient of the American Sexually Transmitted Diseases Association's Distinguished Career Award, the highest recognition of contributions to research and mentoring in the field. She earned her bachelor's in biology from Harvard University, her MD from Thomas Jefferson University, and a master of public health and epidemiology from the University of Washington. We're so excited to have Dr. Marrazzo in this really, really important role. For us, I think as a cisgender woman, being able to see somebody in the role and to have the HIV background that you have and the commitment to this field, I know that I can speak with many advocates in the field and say that we are so ecstatic to have you in this role and very excited to be with you on this webinar. So I'm going to hand it over to you to have you speak a bit about the state of PrEP and cisgender women.
Ranja, thanks. Can everybody hear me okay?
Yep.
Great. Well, I mean, people always say they're humbled by an introduction, but I am beyond humbled by that introduction. It was longer than I probably needed, but I appreciate you so much. And I also just am very, very honored to be here, not only to talk about an incredibly important topic, but also to be here with our colleagues from the Ukraine and also expressing support. And if I am talking too fast for interpretation, please send us a note. Also want to thank Jim for the invitation, as well as my colleagues here, Ernest, Lucas, and Patty, who've been instrumental in getting it started. So with that, why don't I go ahead and at least show some of the slides. What I'm going to show you are slides that summarize a paper that we published just before this year's CROI. Some of you may remember we presented these data at CROI 2023, and there was a lot of interest for the reasons that Ranja so beautifully outlined. Basically, people, cisgender women and their supporters and families and providers really want more information about PrEP in general, but how to use and if to use the PrEP that is available. And so that's really what this analysis was about. I want to start off by acknowledging all of my co-authors on this paper. They're the people who really did the work in the field. And I was just very fortunate enough to be able to help synthesize the findings that they collected over many years. So what is the background here? I think Ranja's already done a beautiful job. I don't really need to belabor this, but I will point out that emtricitabine and TDF, or Truvada, for PrEP was approved for adults in 2012 and extended to adolescents in 2018. The challenge has been that the evidence base for real-world effectiveness and adherence with this product, again, typically recommended as a daily pill, although in men who have sex with men and transgender women, we know that event-driven PrEP also works if you take a pill before and after unprotected anal sex. So the challenge has been that in cisgender women, we really don't and haven't had great data about whether this works, especially if it works without taking it on a daily basis, okay, which is really what women have heard. And the message has been that's quote unquote what you need to do. So what we did with this study was to take advantage of data that had been collected as part of 11 demonstration projects in 6 countries that I'm going to show you on a map next, conducted over 8 years. So they started right around the time that this regimen was approved in 2012, and they went through 2020. Probably would have analyzed this a little sooner if not for the pandemic, but happy that it's really finally out there. There were a lot of cisgender women who participated, almost 6,300. And the idea here was to make daily oral PrEP available to women in these settings in the real world, and I'll describe them in a second, and to use a couple of measures to find out how frequently women used the products and then whether people ended up getting infected with HIV. And I'll show you how we looked at this critical question of adherence, i.e., did women really use the product when it was given to them for free in this demonstration project? So this gives you a sense of where the women were enrolled. As I mentioned, there were almost 6,300, and the majority of women were enrolled in Kenya. You can see there in the Kenya PrEP project, as well as in the Partners Demo project and in the Safer Contraception project, the MPYA project, and the Power project. So lots of studies there. Also, South Africa and Uganda shown there, and then some studies in India too, as shown there, and a couple in the United States. All of the investigators who led these projects are listed on this slide. And what you're seeing is when you're seeing those two numbers with the ratios, for example, if you look under Kenya PrEP, Kiragu, you're seeing 507 over 1,347. That's telling you the number of women for whom in that group we had data on adherence to the study products. So for example, in the Kenya PrEP project, we had data on adherence for a little over a third, 507 women. That's important because we didn't have adherence data on everybody, and that's going to be an obvious limitation of the study, which I will talk about towards the end. But this gives you a sense of the global reach of this study, with a focus particularly, of course, in sub-Saharan Africa, where we, as you'll see, saw the majority of infections. So what we did here, and I'm again pointing out the limitation, but the opportunity here, of those 6,300 women, when you add up the numerators and those ratios that I showed you, that comes to 2,954 women for whom we had adherence data. And that adherence data was either self-report, which we know has a lot of challenges, or measurements of drug levels, which I'll describe to you in a second. We described the overall efficacy of this approach of oral PrEP in these women in the entire group. And we did that by using the adherence data obtained from that smaller group and modeled to the higher group. And I'll describe what that looks like in a second. The bottom line is that there are very interesting and pretty robust ways to use the data from a smaller subset of these women to make assumptions and inferences about the larger group. And that's exactly how we feel like we got a very reliable result that not only makes sense, but gives us a pretty strong signal about how much PrEP is enough using this regimen in women. And that's really the bottom line here. This is a complicated slide. I won't belabor it, but it does point out a couple of things. I'm not sure you can see my pointer here, but the adherence scales, as I mentioned, were both objective, and that largely was using dried blood spots. So basically you get a finger punch, a little bit of blood, and you measure Tenofovir TDF, and that reflects adherence over the last several weeks. So it's a really nice way to know if people have been taking the product somewhat regularly. We also had measures of subjective adherence, and that means we asked women, were they taking these pills? And we used a number of ways to do this, just like we did in the early PrEP studies, such as Voice and FemPrep, So in other words, we had face-to-face, we had interviews, we had computerized interviews, and we asked women in this setting to give us a sense of were they taking tablets daily, 4 to 6 a week, 2 to 3 a week, or less than 2 tablets. And basically, we categorized all of these measures as excellent, very good, or good, fair, poor, or very poor. And we correlated that with what we anticipated to be the number of doses they took per week. So the number of the categories that are going to be important when I show you the results are shown on the left-hand column in the colors there. Again, daily use, 4 to 6 tablets a week, 2 to 3 tablets a week, and less than 2 tablets a week. Now, very importantly, one thing we were not focused on or able to do or did was to ask women whether they timed the use of this product around particular exposures. And I want to come back to that because to me, that's really critical. Were women using the tablets 2 to 3 times a week or once a week because they actually knew that they were going to be at risk or they were going to have sex with someone who was perhaps infected or they were concerned about being infected? So that's, to me, the really important question that we couldn't get at with this data, but I think is going to really help us have this discussion going forward. For those of you who are statistical nerds or statistically inclined, this is that kind of modeling statistical approach that we used. Again, take a look at the paper if you're interested or ask questions. But it let us use data on a small number of women to model what the effect would be in the entire group. So let's take a look at the baseline characteristics. Who was in this group of women? That's the breakdown by country. I apologize, I forgot to mention that Botswana was also represented here in addition to the other three sub-Saharan African countries. And so this was a relatively young group of women, 25 years old. It was actually a fairly educated group with about 3/4 having more than primary education. About half were married, slightly under half had a child. About 12% reported having had or had a sexually transmitted infection at baseline. And 21% self-identified as commercial sex workers. That was the terminology used, and most of those were in the India group, given where the demonstration projects were actually held. This is what the HIV incidence looked like when you categorize it by some of those critical characteristics that I mentioned. So what was our overall HIV incidence in this project? And remember, the way that we look at incidence is simply a number over the person years, so you account for how many women were followed over time. Remarkably, we saw 32 infections, so no infection is good, but this was a lower number than we expected, and that puts the incidence at 0.7. To give you a sense of how that compares to what's being seen, for example, right now in women in many parts of sub-Saharan Africa, it's still around 3.5 to 4%. And if you look at really young women, it's even higher. So this represented a much more diverse group, even though we had good representation from sub-Saharan Africa. You can see that the incidence was higher in younger women. So it was 1.3 in women who were younger than 25 relative to 0.24. Other things that were associated with somewhat higher incidence, although not significantly, were married status as well as never having had a child. Again, these aren't really separated, but these are characteristics that we have seen before in previous studies of PrEP, okay, in cisgender women. So this is a really important slide that I want to take just a second to talk you through. I mentioned that we had dried blood spots for objective measure of use of tenofovir in some women. That was about 147. And then the remainder of those women that we had adherence information on, the subjective ones where they said what they were doing, was, again, in about 2,800 women. Let's take a look at the objective measures first. So what you are looking at here is the likelihood of detection of tenofovir in the blood over time. And it's broken down by those categories that I mentioned before. So again, we were able to relate the level in the blood and assume what that reflected in terms of the pills that women had been taking, how often they had been taking it. So let's look at, for example, the extreme of women who had evidence in the blood of taking it daily, and that was started out very low, about 10%, and went down to almost zero by the time of end of follow-up, okay, which was about 96 weeks. So by objective measures, very few women were taking the pill every single day. Let's go up to a more liberal sort of measurement. So what about detecting pretty much any tenofovir that would be consistent with at least one pill a week? That was actually quite a lot higher. And interestingly enough, that was about 60%. That stayed somewhat consistent over time. So those are probably the two parameters. You can see that about 25 to 30% of women were using the product by direct measures here over time, between 4 to 6 times a week. So that's actually, I think, very interesting, and we're going to come back to that. Now, what I want to also say and make sure people are aware of is that just like we saw in the early PrEP studies of tenofovir products, oral tenofovir or Truvada in cisgender women, there was not a lot of agreement between what women said they were doing and what the measurement in blood said was really happening. So if you look at the percentage of women who reported taking this product daily, it started out at 60%, and it actually stayed above about 50% throughout almost the whole study, and then did decline towards the end. But you can see that over this time, even subjective reporting declined overall. So when you look at what women were saying they were doing, it was in some ways the only thing that correlated with the objective measures were the less frequent use. So a lot of women were saying they were using it when they weren't using it, but the women who were using it less frequently actually were reflected. That was reflected in the measurements in their blood. So pretty interesting, and gave us a chance to look at this. Now, what we did here, and again, I won't belabor this, but we were able to take that data, again, as I mentioned, and apply it to the whole group with this modeling approach. And we ended up describing 4 key groups of women. And you can pretty much intuit that that's what those data looked like, even when you look at those graphs that I showed you, whether it was by self-report or by direct blood measurement. So there were women who probably were using it every single day. Not a lot, about 500 out of those 6,000 plus, almost 7,000 women, 6,300 women, but they were definitely there, and they were a discrete group. There were women who were using it 4 to 6 times a week. That was a little bit more, about 700. There were women who started out using it, perhaps with great intentions, and then declined over time. I think that is a critical group. And if you're thinking about engaging with women about the importance of PrEP, I think this group deserves a lot more study, because clearly these women engaged. They maybe even wanted to continue, but why didn't they? We don't know. That's important. So that was about 1,100, almost 1,200 women. And then there was a substantial group that was consistently low, or perhaps none. So those 4 groups are what we really used in our final analysis, because the really big question is, what was the HIV incidence in each of these groups? And this is the slide where the key result is. And I think what really was most amazing to us, that even though this was a demonstration project, even though, you know, the data were limited, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about some more limitations, we observed 0 HIV infections in the women who were using it consistently daily, 7 days a week. But even in the women who were probably using it 4 to 6 times a week, there was only 1 out of 658 women infected. The vast majority, the rest of the infections, I already mentioned how low the incidence was overall. The remainder of the 11 infections, which were 11 of the 12, occurred in women who started out high but then declined, or were consistent low users. So bottom line is that even with this very, very low incidence of HIV overall, higher patterns of adherence were directly associated with a lower risk of HIV infection. Now, I've already mentioned some really critical limitations. Whenever you pool data from a large heterogeneous bunch of projects, you know, you're introducing chaos, right? But you know, life is chaotic. So I like this because it's a real world analysis that reflects the fact that life is chaotic, but we still had a really biologically plausible result. So that to me is I think very helpful. We did have some different follow-up. So, and the follow-up was associated with adherence, and that's a critical, a little bit of a statistical nerdy thing, but, and we did try to control for this in the analysis, but it makes sense that if women were more likely to take the product, they probably were going to stay in the study more, because the same things that favor retention in a study favor the ability to take the study product, right? So the women who might have needed the product most and who might have been even more likely to get HIV may not have been the ones that we managed to keep in the study the whole time. So that's a really critical point. I already mentioned the fact that the blood levels were available for only a small number of women. I should point out, I didn't say this, but when you looked at the characteristics of those women, they were very reflective of the group overall. So that gives you some confidence that you are using that group appropriately. And then, you know, we're scientists, we always want more data, we always want more people, we always want more measurements. So if we had more, maybe we would have been able to have even more impressive or reassuring results. So just in conclusion, and then I want to make sure, it looks like we've got at least 10 minutes for questions, which is great. It's the largest assessment of effectiveness and adherence of oral Truvada in diverse global real world settings. And cisgender women, got to be very careful of pointing that out. I already discussed the relationship between high adherence or consistent use, probably better to put it that way, versus not, with HIV incidence. And I think that the broader context of what this really means needs to be very much evaluated. I mentioned that we don't know when women, or if women, timed this product to perceived risk. To me, that makes perfect sense. We're very capable of figuring these things out. We don't always know, right, when we're going to be at risk, but many times we do. And I think that that could be a bridging to what we know with MSM and transgender women, that there is adherence forgiveness if you use the product around the times that you are at risk. And I think that makes sense, but we have not been able to really nail that down for cisgender women. And then the last, I think, sobering piece of information that I would emphasize is, remember, over half of the women, cisgender women in these projects, did not use this product consistently. So oral Truvada works. I think it's great, but it is not going to meet the needs of all cisgender women. And that's why we need to keep working very hard on additional prevention options, such as long-acting modalities. I really want to thank everybody who made that analysis possible, particularly the participants for their really heroic participation, and staff at these settings. And I want to thank all of you for being here, and I'm going to turn it back to Ranja.
Thank you so much, Dr. Marrazzo. That was fantastic. And I'm excited to open it up to see if anybody has any questions, any clarifying questions that she can answer. Awesome. I think it's Ioannis has a question. I see your hand raised.
Yes. So this is Yannis. Thank you so much. Really delighted to have you present to the group, and really thank you to Jim as well for being able to bring more Ukrainian participation here. Congratulations on your work. I'm conscious that of the 21% of the data for this analysis came from India. And I think we're all cognizant of the differences in background prevalence from this diverse group of studies. So how is that sort of added into your interpretation in terms of the findings, especially around related to forgiveness, whereby cisgender women do not have to take a pill every single day, but that is the message in our global guidelines, in our national guidelines, and what we encourage, sort of at service delivery. And I say this because I had the wonderful opportunity of visiting the Calcutta demonstration project as well. And there is also that variability in terms of the social support and support that was offered to demonstration project participants. Like there was just something that I observed in Calcutta, as was also with Mysore, was really the wonderful community engagement. And so just conscious of that element, if you maybe can provide some interpretation and how that could skew the findings. Thank you, Dr. Marrazzo, and thank you again for all your wonderful work.
Thanks, Janos. It's so wonderful to hear your voice and to see you. Thanks for being here. So let me start with the first thing about the demo projects providing support. I'm probably overstating it when I say that this is a real world analysis, right? Because even demo projects aren't real world. I think demo projects are real world relative to the kind of extremely rigorous conduct of quote unquote randomized placebo-controlled blinded trials. But even in demo projects, people have support. Personally, I think everything should be like a demo project. I wish that we could provide support for people to be adherent to these interventions. To me, that would be perfect. But I acknowledge that you're right. Again, I talked about chaos. There's chaos, there's demo projects, and then there's randomized controlled trials. So I agree with you. That's something important to note. Regarding your question about India, I would be cautious to make country-specific or even demo project-specific recommendations and inferences from these analyses and these data. And the reasons are, first of all, so much of the assumptions made depended on sort of putting everybody together and making sure that all those characteristics that I showed in the analysis were really carefully weighted. We did not include country in that because, there were some characteristics that are so tied with country, like the commercial sex work, self-designation, and India, that you really can't do that. So I think that this is more of an aggregate signal that should be kind of thought as applying across these populations. When you get to individual groups, you're really going to have to look carefully at the setting, their patterns of perceived risk and exposure, and the capacity they have to continue to use the product. So excellent question. I think there's probably better studies and opportunities to look at that specifically in that situation.
Awesome. We have a question in the chat. Are there plans for doing something and people assigned female at birth?
Yeah, that's a good question. I am not aware that is underway. I think that we are moving really rapidly towards longer acting products. So you probably know that there's a very broad portfolio for multiple groups looking specifically at lenacapavir, which is I think going to offer, again, talk about adherence forgiveness. One way to address that is to give people something that just lasts a long time. So I think my sense is that nothing against Truvada. It's been an incredible tool, and if it works for people, they should continue to use it. But I think it's just really important to recognize relatively that this does not work for all women. And it didn't even work for the women in many of the women in this demonstration project with the support that Janos mentioned. So my sense is that probably time to recognize this works in some contexts, make it available in the suite of interventions, but continue to pursue other options that we hope will really address people's lived experience and needs.
Yvette in the chat said earlier, choice for women is the key to the future. And I think that is absolutely right, that without choice, without additional options, what we see in some contexts is growing disparities around for those who it works well for and for those that it doesn't. And for those that it doesn't work well for, what we know is it tends to be all of these other, some of the chaos that you talked about, right? There are things that it's hard for people to control. And so giving people options that are more controllable,
Oh, yeah.
the best options specifically for cis women.
Thank you so much. I really want to pick up on that because we design access programs about what we've shown work, right? And what works for the women who were able to do it. We kind of don't talk about the participants, let's just say participants, not even cisgender women, but in general, we don't often think or talk about the people, in whom it didn't work and why. I mean, I think we're getting there, but it's really, again, getting to access programs need to recognize that they're fantastic and we're going to grow them and we need them, but they focused again on what we've shown worked, and not everything works for everybody.
Thank you, Giannis, for the clarification in the chat to our Ukrainian colleagues around Truvada and some clarity around that. Jim, your hand is up.
Thank you, Rania, and thank you, Dr. Marrazzo, Jeannie, for making time for us today. I know your time is really precious. And just before I get to my question, how much more time do we have with you? Our webinar goes until the half hour after, and I don't know that you could stay the whole time, so I'm just trying to manage.
I wish I could. I probably have about 8 more minutes. So okay. Yeah, because I need to get to at 10 o'clock. But.
That's right. Thank you again so much. And so excited about this data. As you know, like I was in the session that you presented a couple years ago at Croy, and been chasing this down, was so delighted to see the article come out in JAMA. Before I get to my question, I want to uplift what Julie Patterson says in the chat because it's going to tie into that. But she talks about adherence forgiveness and how that's a really powerful concept and a game changer to show that this should be extended to cisgender women's use for PrEP. And we've had this sort of dogma that women have to be super adherers, they have to take 7 pills a week, I'm sorry, and that they have to take 21 pills. In the US, the CDC tells women they need to take 21 pills before they get protection, and then they need to be super adherers. And this is incredibly frustrating now with science that shows that that's not exactly the case. And we know that the WHO for a long time has said cisgender women need 7 days before protection. So what do you think about, the ability or how this paper might help change guidance so it's more in line with science and more, quote, real world? So we're not telling women they have to take pills for almost a month before they have protection, and that we're not telling women that only super adherers will have strong results here. You showed us that that's not the case. So what does this mean for guidance, especially from the CDC and other places that are still not kind of totally caught up with where the science is?
Yeah, that's an excellent question, Jim. And let me start backwards. So when you look at CDC, WHO guidance, they are, as you know, fixated on, and probably appropriately so, evidence, right? So evidence-based guidance, they use that term a lot. Now, what happens when the evidence you have doesn't support what you think needs to happen? Which may be that, I mean, I think this analysis, and I think also many people's experience in the field, is that event-driven PrEP, oral PrEP with this product, or its counterpart, right, Descovy, and we didn't even talk about that. Somebody mentioned kidney and bone effects in the chat. What would need to happen to validate what we think we're seeing in this study, or what I hypothesize we're seeing in this study, which is that the women who were using the product 4 to 6 times a week were probably covered during the time of the highest risk of exposure, right? I think what this says, it doesn't go so far as to say that event-driven oral tenofovir-based PrEP is going to work in women. I think it does go so far as to suggest that a minimum of 4 pills a week is probably enough to cover most of the events that are going to confer risk. Now, do we need an additional level of evidence to sort of say, not only that, but you can actually time maybe the use of 2 or 3 pills around an act exactly as we have recommended in the context of MSM and transgender women? I think we probably need more evidence to specifically say that, because that may mean going down from 4 pills to 2 pills, right? If you're doing a pre and post, which is what we ideally would like to get to. So I think from these data, I personally would be comfortable with that 4 pill a week threshold, recognizing all the limitations of this study. But I think for formal event-driven PrEP, we probably need some more robust data. Now, one big message from this, though, I can't remember if it was Ranja or somebody else, this concept that you are a terrible person or you're going to get infected if you don't take it every day, that's what needs to go away. To me, that is sort of, again, setting an expectation. It's incredibly patronizing. It really sort of has the potential to shame people who, either can't do that or just don't, can't make it happen. So to me, the message is, people who need PrEP need to figure out how to make it work for them. And this offers them one option where you can say, look, if you can at least take it, 4 days a week, you can feel probably pretty safe, right? If you can take it every day, that's going to be like whatever metaphor you want to use, it's going to be an extra layer of protection. But the 4 days a week make a lot of sense. And then intuitively, of course, if you're going to have sex on a Tuesday, you would like to make those 4 days Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, right? But that means, again, getting back to this chaos concept, planning is not always in the mix here. So I think those are a few of the thoughts that I have, and I hope that helps. I do think the guidance does need to consider this carefully. I can't speak for whether they should do it or not, but I certainly think this is a very strong signal.
Thank you for that. And just really quick, thank you, Rania. Just what do you think the appetite is to do a study around event-driven PrEP for cisgender women to actually nail this down? Like, you've given some signals here, but it's not enough to say you can do event-driven. So is there appetite to do this?
Well, I would turn that back to you and ask certainly the community. I think scientifically, for me, I absolutely have the question: do I get to decide everything despite, my job? No. It really requires a lot of scientific input and a lot of community input. But I think if people think it's important, we really want to hear that. So.
I think that's a great segue into the next kind of question I want to go into. We have Whitney in the chat talking about MPTs, multi-purpose technologies. And I think when we're talking about cisgender women, this is such an important piece. And she says that some of her very small, modest study findings show that folks who can become pregnant would be very interested in biomedical products to prevent pregnancy and HIV and/or STIs. AVAC has done a great job tracking the progress of these products. However, it feels quite distant. And I can add a caveat, I think, especially for folks in the United States, it feels very far away. What can the social science research community do to support the pathway to implementation? Are there questions that need to be answered to support the importance, priority of MPTs?
So I think there are a lot of questions. First of all, I will say I don't think there are many more enthusiastic advocates for multipurpose prevention technology than I am, given my background and my focus on women's health and the fact that we know. I mean, I always go back to the early PrEP studies and cisgender women, Voice and FemPrep, in addition to others. And the reason women stayed in the study, despite the fact they weren't taking the products, was because they got birth control, STI screening and treatment, and care, right? So women were concerned about pregnancy, and they were really concerned about STIs. So we really need to, that to me was just a gigantic message that we ignore at our peril. I think that the path forward for MPTs has been challenging, largely around the regulatory landscape and the availability of actual products that we know are safe and can be combined and can be administered and can be shown to be effective. So it's an incredibly complicated situation, as all of you know. I do have a lot of and enthusiasm for the Matrix program that is being led by Sharon Hillier and others, which is actually looking at the dual prevention pill that specifically will be a combination of antiretroviral PrEP as well as hormonal contraception. I think there are potential, I think, for vaginal rings in particular that could be contraceptive and also deliver antiretrovirals. That makes exquisite sense to me. And now that we have long-acting injectable PrEP, we should be thinking about combining that with long-acting injectable hormonal contraception. And I know people are. I don't mean to say that they aren't. So I feel like after a lot of years of perhaps not a lot of coordinated movement, we're finally getting to the point, I think, in the next 5 years, where we may have some real data on really products that actually have legs, and may have sustainable opportunity for manufacture and deliveries, and they may be safe and effective. So I'm pretty optimistic. I recognize all the challenges, but I think this should be an incredibly high priority for women's health.
Awesome. Awesome. There's a lot of comments in the chat about dosing. I think you answered a lot of that very well with kind of like your thoughts around how folks should proceed and the needs that we have for more information around that. So that is fantastic. Let me see. We have another kind of comment from Julie, who's going off in the chat with some great stuff. So I just want to make sure we get there. She said, we may need more robust data to have clear evidence that event-driven oral PrEP will work for cis women, but we are very unlikely to get that data because the research system is also patronizing and will not offer the funds to support this kind of research any longer in cis women because they are focusing only on long-acting PrEP. And so would love your thoughts on that, especially in the role that you get to sit in.
Well, what I can say in my role is not always everything, but I will just say that I continue to emphasize that choice is important, and I continue to emphasize and believe that long-acting PrEP is great, but again, that requires planning and access and self-recognition that you need that product, right? What it doesn't cover are the times that are unplanned, where you may not be in a position to get those products. So I still think on-demand, quick-acting products should be prioritized and considered as part of the suite of interventions. So again, there's no one size fits all here. We have very few, if any, magic bullets, magic shots, magic pills. We just don't have those. That's not the way we need to be thinking about this. It's not person-centered. It's not real-world centered. And it's just not, I think, where we need to go. So I hope that partly answers your question. Great.
It does. I think so. And, Dr. Marrazzo, thank you so much for being here. I know that you have to run to your next thing, but we are so grateful for the time that you spent with us here today. Like I said, I think I can probably speak for so many of us here who do HIV advocacy work and have done it for a long time, that you in this role feels so exciting. And to have a cisgender woman who is in this role, who I think, can really kind of advance us to, I hope that we get to see, the end of HIV together with you in this role is really extraordinary. So please, a virtual round of applause for you and you showing up here for us today. Thank you very much.
Oh my gosh, thank you so much. First of all, I meant to thank Jim's for the playlist. Any talk that starts with Beyonce, I am there. Second, I love the idea of having us experience and the HIV together. Nothing gives me more energy, more hope, more commitment. So let's do it. Okay, thanks you guys. Have a great weekend.
Thank you so much. I'm so excited to introduce our next person. So we're not done yet. We still have one more amazing speaker, Joyce Nganga, who's going to come up. Joyce does program development and advocacy program at ISFA Africa, the Initiative for Solutions Africa. She has over 10 years of experience in development work, implementing projects on maternal child health, sustainable livelihoods, girl-child education, economic empowerment, and sexual reproductive health targeting adolescents, girls, and young women. She has a huge amount of experience in advocacy, capacity development for startup organizations and community projects, and experience working with national and county government, implementing international, national, and grassroots projects. So very, very excited to bring Joyce up to talk about cisgender women in PrEP. Joyce, how are you?
Very well. Thank you so much for that introduction, and thank you to Dr. Jeanne. She has already left, for a wonderful presentation, which has set a background on what I will be speaking about. So thank you, Jim, as well, and thank you for the opportunity for this space. So I'm going to pick up from where Dr. Jeanne has stopped and kind of just bring the voice from the cisgender women and the work that we have been doing. So it's going to be, we are going to start broad, and then we can, I will give us some reflections on the paper as we come to the end of the presentation. So let me start with the beautiful faces on your screen that you are seeing. This was taken during the HIV and Women conference in Nairobi in February. I think we have some of the participants of the workshop in this webinar today. But I wanted to talk about it to say that I think Jim always does the Croy Margarita breakfast, and this was our session for a Margarita lunch with the young women, because in the conference there was a lot of science, and we needed to come together with the young women to just talk about the science, talk about what they're understanding, clarify some of the questions that they had. And it was clear that sometimes in research presentations, conferences, workshops, really sometimes we could be speaking to ourselves. The communities don't understand some of the terms, don't have a lot of questions. And yet the science is about the same community who don't understand. So we created a space where we could speak with the young women and see their understanding of the conference and the science. And that was great. So I will talk about the African Women Prevention Community Accountability Board because we are really focused on programming, on advocacy around choice for cisgender women, of African women and girls. And really, I would not do justice with this presentation without first focusing on the work that the African Women Prevention Community Accountability Board are doing. So we are comprised of 11 women from 7 countries, and those are the countries are listed there. Some of the participants here are part of the board. So a shout out to you, Yvette, and other members who are on the call now. So how we are organized, we are from Eastern and Southern Africa, and we are talking about choice and introduction of options. So as we speak about PrEP, about choice, about what is in the pipeline, That's a conversation that we are having, and actually a movement that we are having right now as women and girls. We are an intergenerational kind of board. We have older generation. Sometimes they make fun of us and say we have mileage, and we have the younger generation. So it's a kind of a mentorship space as well, where young women also get mentored around advocacy, and advocacy really for choice and HIV prevention, and focus on reducing new HIV infections. So we focus on policy change, access and rollout, financing for choice. We're engaging at national, regional, global levels, and sometimes at the country levels. We are also doing subnational engagement with some of the people that we are engaging on. So last year, we developed a HIV Prevention Choice Manifesto for women and girls in Africa. And I'll speak a little bit on the call to action for the manifesto for women and girls, because it will answer the question as, if PrEP is not working for cisgender women, then what? What choice can we bring, or what do women have in the pipeline if the PrEP options is having challenge, as we have seen clearly? So this choice manifesto tries to point out areas where program policy should implement so that we can see a reduction in the new prevention. So the goal of this choice manifesto is a future free of HIV for African daughters and women in Africa. So the call to action is center people and communities, key and marginalized populations. We need to focus here and ensure that we scale interventions that target key and marginalized populations. During research and development, observing good participatory practice guidelines, ensuring that communities are at the center, that they're informing ongoing and future pipeline future pipeline of research products from onset, design, formulation, and that they are really at the center, and they're the ones talking about the kind of products for prevention that they would like to have. And then choice is key. We have to scale up massive scale and increase access to safe and effective HIV prevention options, methods that we have at country level, while also thinking about the pipeline, what is to come, and how we can ensure that our health systems are geared or strengthened in such a way that they can uptake the new options. So to ensure that women have control over their health and their bodies and access to a full range of effective and safe options that works best for them. And we know that women have a lot going on in their lives. So sometimes one option at one time may not work, but may work at another time. And we are going to talk about that later on in the presentation. So programs that deliver, that's all about integration of HIV prevention. Largely at the moment, the HIV prevention is done as a vertical program, but I think more integration as a board, we call for more integration into the existing whole sexual reproductive health services, including those posted on the screen, family planning, cervical cancer, STIs, prevention, and all that. And then finance choice. So strategy and financing choice would look like this, that they're actually staff who are paid in clinics, in places, in facilities. It's fully staffed, there is a budget, and there's a procurement for choice-based HIV prevention. So not just mentioning that you support choice, but actually have it reflected in your budgets, in the kind of staff that you have and all that. The future, we have said, and Dr. Jeanne was very clear on this, that we have options at the moment, but they're not sufficient. There's no magic bullet to one option, and that one size does not fit all. Therefore, we need to prioritize getting more products from research both systemic, non-systemic options, because what we have seen even in the paper for Dr. Jeanne is that people are in different circumstances of their life. Some want a PrEP-driven option, some want long-term, some want just for a short while. Some, like women, would want something safe if they're breastfeeding, or pregnant populations may want to consider options that are non-systemic. So considering all that, and then lastly, adopt a human rights-based approach to choice, addressing stigma, discrimination, criminalization. Cannot overemphasize this, as we are seeing this currently in the world as a movement of criminalization. We are seeing bills, we are seeing countries, people who cannot even access the PrEP that we are talking about because they are criminalized, because the bills have been passed and they have become, they cannot no longer access some of the services that we are talking about. So the Choice Manifesto was launched in September last year. We had a champion, that's Winnie Byanyima, who is the Executive Director of UNAIDS, who continues to champion choice and champion the Choice Manifesto with us. So I'm going to move on to reflections on the paper that we have just seen. And I will start by reflecting that prevention versus treatment, that we are talking about prevention here. And it's different to talk about treatment for people who need treatment to save their lives, and prevention. Sometimes treatment will get more emphasis than prevention. And therefore, it's good to remember that we are preventing here. And the kind of motivation that you find in treatment is not always there in prevention, especially when it is rollout, on a broad rollout, like a national rollout. You find in treatment that there are support groups, and you have to keep, the support group, there's regular checkups and all that. And there is more offered in treatment actually than in prevention. And therefore, for somebody to get the self-motivation to keep going for prevention, it's something that we need to talk about. So we know that women, the rates for HIV infections are high. The other thing that we know is that we are off track actually for meeting the global goals. The other thing that we know for sure, and we have seen in the data and statistics, is that HIV rates, new infections rates are higher in younger women. And we also know that younger women don't plan for sex, that sex just sometimes happens. They go to a party and they had not planned to engage, and things just happen. It's for younger women, it's harder to plan for events, and it just happens to them. So the question of event-driven PrEP is a good one to think, even when we are thinking about younger women, but also in older women. Events, sometimes women are not really able to plan for when to have sex and all that. And so if they have to take PrEP that waits for 7 days to be effective, then perhaps these are some of the gaps in research where we are not able to manage high HIV infections. Most cisgender women may perceive themselves at low risk, especially for those in monogamous relationships, those who are not engaged in sex work or drug, or don't inject drug and all that, and don't have multiple partners. So that is also another reason. But we're also calling for purposeful inclusion of cisgender women in studies, and also how we communicate about studies. If we are studying and we say this is meant for MSM, when we are coming to roll that out and offer it to cisgender women, then it becomes a challenge and also stigmatizes some products. So we must be able to communicate properly about products. On adherence, we need to support adherence and then expand the options for cisgender women. We have talked about the low perception of risk, the stigma, poor social support. We have talked about that. And here we are really saying that we should be considering other products that can cover up for adherence. For example, long-acting PrEP options such as the injectable Cabalé and the pivoting vaginal ring, that may at least alleviate the adherence challenges that we are experiencing with the PrEP. We need to have tailored counseling, especially for cisgender women, supportive services that destigmatize PrEP. There's a lot of stigma around PrEP and PrEP use, and that affects adherence and people wanting to access it and demand for it. Their privacy concerns and also the financial difficulties and more support given to communities, including cisgender women, could really help. Then there are concerns, genuine concerns, especially pregnancy and reproductive concerns, side effects, concerns about long-term effects, and also partner consent. For service delivery, friendly settings for women, the attitude of the providers who are giving this options matters a lot in terms of adherence, in terms of access and all that. We have talked about the communication that should be made clear about some of these products, because once we stigmatize products and saying they belong to a certain group of population, then it becomes difficult for another to access this. Then we have really talked about this, acknowledge that high but less than perfect adherence, what we are calling the adherence holidays, or and all that needs to be communicated, because it's not being communicated now, and that would alleviate anxiety around missed doses and refocus conversation on individual motivations. Yes, this is not well communicated at the moment. Hardly do communities know this, and therefore, if you have failed to adhere to this, then you might stop taking PrEP and not show up in the clinic. And I will finish by saying for program consideration, policy considerations, that is really the high time that we implement the call to action in the Choice Manifesto, because it does point out to areas where program, policy, and all that should be paying attention to ensure that choice becomes a reality. So the choice for us as accountability board, the African Women Prevention Community Accountability Board, we do not talk for any particular product, but what we do is to say, ensure that there is a basket filled with safe and effective options, and so that when the communities come, they can find something for their use. And we're also saying that circumstances for people are very, very different. Hence, there should be something for everyone, regardless of the circumstance that they are. So let me stop there and hand it back, and happy to answer any questions, but also note that I also want to join all of you in saying that we hope to experience the end of HIV together. Thank you very much, and happy to take any question.
Thank you so much, Joyce. That was such an amazing presentation, and thank you for the work that you do. The Choice Manifesto is brilliant, and I will take moderator's privilege, and I would love to kind of ask you, if there's one recommendation. We got to have Dr. Marrazzo here earlier. And so what would be the one ask that you have of research when it comes to cis women, HIV, and PrEP?
Yeah, I think the one ask, if I can go, is to say that the options we have are good, but they're not sufficient, and especially for cis women. So the research should ensure that we get safe and effective products options for women, because realistically speaking right now, the only product that we can say is exclusively for women that they can use, it's discreet for women, is only the vaginal dapivirine ring. So we need more options, and also we need like the dapivirine ring rolled out outside of implementation studies, and we need to see how it behaves in a real world setting. From where we stand, we believe that the efficacy for the dapivirine ring will be higher in a real community setting. And also other options like the PrEP. We had an experience in Zambia last week. We visited a clinic run by the government that is already rolling out Kabale. And our experience there was that men, women, young and old are coming to demand for Kabale. And so that demystifies some of the misconceptions that perhaps one population is the one going to accept Kabale. But we were surprised that there was a 15-year-old who came to get Kabale, but there was also a 70-year-old man who came to also get Kabale. So the way the products behave in a real-world setting is very different in implementation studies. And therefore, our other ask is that let the products that are already there be rolled out, let them go into the communities because communities are demanding for them.
Amazing. Do you, so it sounds like Giannis actually made a comment in the chat that in Europe, there's still a lot of work to be done around awareness when it comes for PrEP. When it comes to PrEP and cisgender women, I would say here in the US, it's a similar case. We have increasing awareness, but it's not very high. But would you say in the work that you've done that you see significant awareness and demand for PrEP when it comes to cisgender women?
Yes, I think there's demand for PrEP. With cisgender women, we have had community education programs where we are talking about all the options actually, and asking women what they would prefer, what they would like. But I think the significant pill burden has been such a challenge in all the creation forums that we have been. It always comes like, I don't like to take pills every day. And also women have been saying, I don't want to feel like I am sick because it is prevention, but it's so much like I'm taking treatment for life. So, so that has been a significant challenge where communities say, I want to stay back because of the pill burden and the fact that this is prevention, but I feel like I have to take treatment for life. But not to say that the communities are not demanding. Yes, sometimes it's the issue of access. Getting access to the clinics is a challenge as well. So as much as we have created the awareness, the products are sometimes not available in the clinics, or the communities are not getting access to the community. And part of it also is because of stigma to go to a clinic and you're HIV negative, but the PrEP is being offered in clinic where also treatment is being offered. And that kind of creates stigma. So we are still in the stigma, and that causes people not to go for prevention services because they're offered together where the treatment is offered.
And there's so much to learn from implementation in the continent thus far that I think is super applicable to other places that are looking to really increase and scale up PrEP utilization amongst cisgender women. So thank you for that. We have a question from Nita. She said, thank you, Joyce, for your valuable presentation. How are we engaging the users of PrEP to share their experiences in Africa and maybe be part of advocacy within ethical requirements?
Yes, that's powerful. So what we are doing in our education awareness programs is that we always bring the users of the product because they have testimonies of the product working for them. They demystify the side effects and all the fears that people come with. So we have always consistently ensured that we are working together for advocacy with those who are using the products, because they're the ones then who can give the testimonies of the product, and they give confidence that they have been using the product and they're okay. There's still fear of side effects. There's still fear of what will happen to me when I start taking these drugs. But having people already on this, on PrEP and talking about it openly, yes, and the testimonials go a long way. And these are great advocates for us as well.
Yeah, I love that. And I feel like figuring out ways to turn that advocacy into employment for folks who are users is an important part of our advocacy journey and really making it sustainable and making it ethical. So that's great to hear. Yvette, you have your hand raised. Come on down, come in, tell us your question.
No, thank you so much. And thank you. Thanks everyone for staying on Joyce's great presentation. I just wanted you to talk a little bit about the information that we received with the country presentations, if you want to, around how the introduction of choice in the clinics where it is becoming, part of the government's, the government's plan, how that has then has grown people taking up prevention methods. Instead of just taking a method that they are offered, they are now in, for instance, in South Africa, people who are offered choice counseling choose a method. They don't go out of the clinic without a method, instead of just being given an option of, we have the condom available, we have PrEP available. Instead, where there's choice counseling, people actually make a choice. If you mind to talk a little bit about the meeting last week and some of the key outputs from countries that you got.
Awesome, great. Yeah, so we had a meeting with the board and we had some country presentations. One of the requirements as a board member is that you're a champion in your country to ensure that choice becomes a reality in the country where you are. And so in comparing what we are all doing in all the 7 countries, yes, as Yvette is saying, choice counseling is something that we are pushing as advocates, such that it's the communities who end up choosing, but not the clinics that end up just giving the methods that they think people need. And so choice counseling across the 7 countries is something that we want to uphold, we want to continue doing, and we already have 2 countries that are almost getting there, and especially Zambia. And we're really happy with the case study in Zambia, where they almost have all the products available, and the clinic is offering the choice counseling, and people are able, especially, to get the long injectable Cabalé there in outside of implementation studies. So we are really looking to Zambia so that we can use that as a case study for the rest of Africa. I know South Africa is also ahead with the choice, and they're offering choice. But we also ask ourselves, whose choice anyway? Because funders and governments are the ones, and providers also determine what choice is for individuals. And that is something that we are, in our advocacy, we are calling out to say it's not about the funding, although we know that funding really determines choice for what's available in the basket. But it's a call that really, if we are to meet our global goals to end AIDS by 2030, we must really be honest with ourselves, because we wanted to introduce PrEP, but we have found in the statistics that PrEP doesn't work for everyone. We haven't met the goals for implementing oral PrEP. Therefore, we need to bring other products that can work for people, and that one size does not fit all. That's a reality on the ground, and that people are in circumstances that make them choose one option as over another, and those reasons are genuine, and we must program for person-centered
Да, я підпис
kind of
поставила.
approach. Thank you.
Да.
Thank you so much, Joyce. I think that's such a good point. Our
До
goals to
побачення.
are very much, part of it was driven by the advent of PrEP and the biomedical tool to help prevent HIV. But if it's not working for everybody, then we really have to readjust and I think reconsider what our approach is, and reconsider investments that we have to make sure that the tools we have work for everybody. Darren brought up a great point in the chat. He said, thank you for the presentation. I think what we take away is that awareness isn't one and done. It is a continuous education process. Every generation is a new generation, and what we learn today may not be heard by the next generation, and our learnings must adapt and be shared as language and knowledge evolves. I think that's such a great point. And Joyce, I'm interested in what does PrEP education look like from an intergenerational lens? So how is it different for younger girls and for young women and older women? What are some of the trends that you see when it comes to talking about PrEP and awareness and education for cis women across our lifespan?
Yeah, that's a great one. Yes, so it has not been standard. Education awareness programs are not standard across different populations. For young people, you have to be on TikTok, on social media, on every other platform that you can be. And that's how the message is driven. If you don't drive it on social media, on TikTok, on X Space, then you're not communicating and you're not reaching the young generation, the young women. But for the older generation, we have found that, having publications, something written, and also education programs, face-to-face meetings, roundtable meetings. Women have always organized in groups where they come and do table banking. Those are good forums where older women can receive the information. Across social media is not also the same. You can use Facebook for the older generation. I think Facebook is more friendly. But for the young people, you have got to be on TikTok. And we have amazing, amazing young people who are advocates and are using TikTok to actually take their medication for prevention. So they come on live on TikTok and they take their prevention. And that really helps to just keep pushing that, we need to prevent among the younger population. I think that's what we are seeing. There's also artificial intelligence kind of messaging that, young people now, everything is artificial intelligence. So for those who are able to use it, that communication, the prompts, the what, I think it works. But for the younger generation, we really have to be very technology driven in passing the messages that we want to. Otherwise, on traditional media, no, that wouldn't work. But also for the traditional media as well can pass the messages, going live on programs that promote on television, radio shows and all that. Those work as well, but really for the older generation. Yeah. There are some products also that are more cool to young people than others. So we have found that we have to be really creative in the way that we message for a product. If you message it and it looks for older people, the young people are not going to be, it's not appealing to them. So packaging the content, also very important. So lastly, maybe before Jim comes on, I see he has unmuted. I wanted to say we have in the pipeline 3 products options. We have Cabalet injectable, we have vaginal dapivering ring, and we have in the pipeline maybe longer the dual prevention pill. So as advocates, our focus is to ensure that this gets into the ministry's policies, gets into the guidelines so that they can be rolled out. Some countries do better than others, but we are hoping as a movement, as the board, we can help to unlock regulatory processes such that drugs from research are brought to the country much faster than what we have seen. It has been such a struggle to get products in the countries, but this is an area that we aim to focus on. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Joyce. Thank you all for being here. This has been an amazing conversation, and I think that we can all agree that we are going to we get among cisgender women. And so I'm very honored to be able to moderate such brilliance today. Joyce, thank you. Thank you for everything that you brought. And I will hand it over to Jim to close us out.
Thank you, Rania. And yes, let's do some thank you. So first of all, this panel was straight up rock stars. Our moderator, a rock star, both speakers, Jeannie and Joyce. So let's give them some major Zoom love, virtual love, give the emojis, put it in the chat. What an amazing lineup. I can't imagine having a better way to go into the weekend than with this amazing discussion. So thank you. And, you know, behind the scenes, I want to give special shout out and love to our two translators, our Ukrainian translators, Stas and Dmitry, who not only are translating from English into Ukrainian, but doing so in a scientific manner with lots of scientific words that are crazy in our own language, let alone in other languages. So please give them some love. And thank you, Giannis, for always advocating on behalf of your colleagues and comrades in Ukraine. We're always really delighted to partner and offer Ukrainian translation on some of our webinars, and much love and solidarity to all the Ukrainians who joined today or who will be listening to this webinar. Over 100 Ukrainians out of the 500 plus who registered for this webinar. So lots of interest, always happy to partner. Thank you, Giannis, for making that happen. So thank you, Giannis, Stas, Dmitry, Rania, Jeannie, and Joyce, and to every last one of you for being here. The final thing I'll say is everyone who registers will get an email within the next day or so, maybe by Monday, with a link to the recording, with a link to the slides. We'll have a resource document with all the great URLs and information that was shared in the chat. So we'll have that all collated for you. There will be, and for our Ukrainian friends who are on this call, there will be a link to the Ukrainian recording with Stas and Dimitri's dulcet tones doing all the wonderful interpretation. So with that said, we are going to close out this call. Thank you all so much for participating, and hope to see you on our next Choice Agenda webinar coming up on Tuesday, calling Watch the Watcher, all about systems and surveillance and criminalization. So another really hot topic. Hope to see you there. In the meantime, have a wonderful weekend. Take good care of yourselves. Be safe, and we'll see you on the other side. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Jim, and everybody. Take care. Stay well.